Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to my new old channel, Quality Aviation. Everybody knows me, Bruce Bessette. I am you probably remember me when I was at Avionics Education. That channel over there was used mostly for, uh, you know, polished videos on aircraft training, avionics training. I had some other side stories, and I haven't been on it in a long time because I've been moving around from state to state and job to job, and I finally landed here in Alabama. Loving it here in Alabama, and now I've set up my studio and I've decided, well, let's get back on YouTube right now. So we created the second channel here, Quality Aviation, to be a little bit less focused or less nuanced than the avionics education. I remember, I'm still going to be on the avionics education channel. Don't forget me over there. But on this channel, I want to get into more subjects that are um, public interest in aviation safety. As some of you know, I was an aircraft accident investigator, a former FAA regulator, and I'm also an instructor at the FAA Academy. So I have a lot of regulatory knowledge, a lot of history working in aviation. The whole time that I've been in the last 10 years or so, I've been actually working in the field. I've been a chief inspector, a director of maintenance. I worked in training. I worked on the 737 MAX at Boeing. I've been dealing with aircraft parts at Honeywell. So I have been in the system working as a mechanic in addition to working with FAA inspectors and training them and working with some lawyers, excuse me, and helping and assisting them for accident investigations. Now, I am not a person that likes to get on the air as soon as an airplane falls out of the sky and start speculating about it. I do talk about it in the sense that, well, I know how to investigate an accident. I know the questions that I would ask, but I'm going to let the professionals go ahead and make their statements first before I'll actually start commenting on them. So don't ask me anything about accidents for aircraft that just fall out of the sky. Let's let the investigation play out then before I start putting my 2 cents in. Well, tonight this is way different than my normal video format to where I would go through and I'd edit and I'd go through and spend time and I'd do a script. Here I'm just going to be more nuanced and just kind of talk between you and me. So tonight we're going to talk about a subject and cover a video, a news story that was put out by CNBC recently, and it's a good story. But I'm going to go through and kind of put more of my insider twist to it. Now, we've been talking about this subject of mechanic shortage since I was working for the airlines in the early 90s. And there was a lot of talk about where the mechanics were going to come from. And we were talking about the average age of a mechanic, that we were starting to get long in tooth. And to let you people know that, there was a time when I first got into the industry. I started training in 81. I went to A&P school at Spartan. And I shared classrooms with a lot of the GI Bill mechanics, so the people that were coming from Vietnam, from the military, that were getting out. They were using their GI Bill to get their mechanic ratings. So that, if you went back in history, you could learn that was a time in America we had a lot of mechanics coming into the system. Unfortunately, there at the same time we had, I don't know, in 1981, everybody remember the gas shortages, Carter, high interest rates, recession. It took a tank. And the industry does that. One thing you learn about working in aviation, that it has booms and busts. It's just the way it is. It's not steady stream because competition is incredibly severe among airlines. Everybody's trying to cut everybody's throat, literally, in the airline industry. There's always competition to make more money, to save more money. And because of that, they take a lot more chances than any other industry. So we have booms and busts in this industry. I've gone through, we'll start with in 1977, my dad, we had the deregulation to where we had a short bust in the industry when the airlines reorganized, but we had a huge boom after that. But we had this rapid expansion in the airlines until 81, 82, to where we had a bust again. In other words, the airlines expanded so quickly that they had to contract. Okay? This is where I went into the military. There was no jobs for me as a mechanic. So I went active duty military. Never regretted a day of it. It was the best time. And I want to talk about a video later on when I'm going to talk about avionics technicians, particularly using their military experience and then translate it to a civilian experience. That's another video for another day. But I got out of the military in 1987. By then, the industry started to boom again. We had a little bit earlier in the 70s, right after deregulation, we had Southwest Airlines. When I got in there in '89, we had America West Airlines. We had a lot of startups, airlines that were booming, that they were expanding, that they were hiring. So we didn't talk about a shortage because we had a lot of technicians that were paused in 80, 81 that now came into the system. Okay? But there was a talk of a shortage, meaning that we could have done with a lot more until the next, I won't say bust, but we did have a retraction again. We had the Gulf War, to where the industry expanded out, and then the Gulf War, we had this worldwide internal recession, and it came back. Well, a lot of people looked at that, especially those of us that worked in the industry, and they say, I don't want to be working for an industry that had this big boom or bust mentality. It's really unnerving sometimes, especially when you have, as an aircraft mechanic, if you're going to be working for the big airlines, you're going to be living in the crappy cities. No offense to Dallas, Atlanta, the big hub, Phoenix. By the way, I lived in Phoenix, and I actually love Phoenix. Yeah, which was fortunately for me, because that's where America West was and Southwest was. So there was this time that people are thinking, do I really want to get into aviation? So that's when we started to see the numbers diminish. In 1996, we had a ValueJet accident. Okay. So in that case here, we had a couple of mechanics, technicians, that were held legally responsible. They were charged with manslaughter for the deaths of those passengers because they had put on, they just weren't trained, and they had put on hazardous materials unsecured on an aircraft that caught fire. And that also put a shudder to people wanting to come into this industry. So that also kind of put the brakes on the interest of people coming in. So now we've come up to the video to where we've had 2008 bust, again, boom and bust. So Gulf War, 2008.com, recession, I think, and I got to remember, there was a couple other busts in there. Housing bubble, I think I remember, and there was another one. Oh yeah, COVID. COVID was a big shakeup. Between the Boeing groundings of the MAX that put airplanes on the ground, and at the same time, you had everybody stuck at home. They were told, 2 weeks to pause I won't go there. But that also made people come in and sit and say, well, what am I going to do with my life after that? We started to transition after a year, by the way. A lot of us old-timer mechanics, now keep in mind, when I was going to A&P school at the end of the Vietnam era, so the number of mechanics that were coming from that GI Bill were diminishing down. That was the end of it. Okay, this is 1981, 2020. How many years is that? That's 40 years. From 81 to 2020, and all those mechanics were now said, time to pull the plug, and they retired. Now we're talking about a real mechanic shortage, and then somebody said to Bruce, how'd they get by with the shortage of mechanics before? Well, as any company will do, you go through and you first start with automation. You go through and you make aircraft that are more self-evaluating. You make it simpler. You rely on technology. And that's great initially. So you can get by with fewer technicians if the airplanes are brand new. So from, I'm going to say probably, from late 80s moving into the mid 90s, we had a boom in aviation. Boeing was putting out airplanes. Airbus was putting out airplanes. CRJs and Bombardier at the time and Embraer were putting out aircraft for the small airlines. So it was a boom. We had a lot of aircraft coming in the system, but they were highly technical. They were really electronically. It had a lot of built-in tests. They were new. They were easy to work on. I argue you some of the Airbus had some glitchy that was a glitchy airplane for being heavily electronics, based on what I worked on it. But you could get away with fewer technicians and less trained technicians because you could rely on the automation a little more. Well, that's only good for about 5 years. Once an airplane gets to that 5-year mark, you're not slamming boxes anymore to get it fixed. Now you're really having to chase wires in the aircraft because the aircraft is wearing out. You're getting critters inside. The aircraft is flexing. You're getting corrosion. Now you're back to troubleshooting mostly wires, when before it was tubing and cabling. We went to fly-by-wire electronic buses. Now you're chasing those. So now we need technicians again. We start seeing a reduction in technicians. So we move forward to after 2020. Have we recovered? Now the shakeup is done. Those of us who are retired, I am not retired. I will never retire from this career. I love it too much. I am number 3 or 4 generation pilot mechanic in my family. This is in our blood, at least up to me. And I will stay in it forever. I'll do it for as long as I can, for as long as my body will hold out. Again, an aircraft mechanic has got to think about the fact that your physical being is only going to last so long. So we have a mechanic shortage. Okay, we have to admit it now. We really do have it. A lot of A&P schools have shut down after the COVID. They never reopened. We've got a generation of kids today that learn differently. One thing about aviation and being a mechanic is that you are going to be reading a lot. Everything we do in aviation is written down. You must follow maintenance manuals, instructions, work cards. You have to read. And that's not done a lot in this generation of cell phones and TikTok videos. So we're losing that skill of long form reading, which you need to do when you're an aircraft mechanic. That was one skill that was going away. Another skill is the plain tinkering mechanical skills. You'll see this in the video, and we put the video on here in a minute. Somebody had mentioned the fact that kids can't change their own tires today. Well, the joke is that people are building new cars and we're losing the right to fix anyway. We want to think about everything being disposable. So we've got built-in obsolescence in our cars. I mean, some people argue in our aircraft. Do we want built-in obsolescence in our aircraft? We've got aircraft now that have been around for, 75 years now for the B-52. And I just saw in San Antonio that they put out the next the next generation of the B-52. Fantastic airplane. That airplane will have every rivet and skin replaced on it, all the avionics. It's a perfect platform for a perfect message. Boeing made it solid to last forever. Now we look at the modern aircraft, and the bean counters get into the design. They said, where can I save a penny? Where can I save a penny? Where can I save a penny? And we literally start removing metal from the airplane to make it lighter, to save fuel, to make it go faster. But we took that reliability and the strength and the longevity out of the aircraft, which means as these aircraft start to fatigue and mail, you're going to need mechanics. And we're going to talk about specialty mechanics in a minute. Right now, they'll say the word AMT, Aviation Maintenance Technician, and that's used interchangeable with mechanic. But a little later in the video, I'm going to stop and talk about our other specialized mechanics that I work in the field. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and talk about this video. Go ahead and play it. Like I said, it's a very good video. I'm going to give CNBC some benefits for that. And I have the link below in the feed when I get done with this, and I'll edit it. But it's a really good video. Without further ado.
Aircraft mechanics have a very important job. They keep the thousands of airplanes flying every day safe. But experts say there's a critical shortage of aviation maintenance technicians that can't keep up with growing demand.
It's already impacting the ability to grow. An aircraft is on the ground and I don't have a mechanic to fix it.
The fatal accident between an American Airlines regional jet and an Army Black Hawk helicopter in Washington, D.C. has cast a light on how much pressure there is on an already strained industry where the slightest of variables determine safety. Boeing estimates that 716,000 technicians are needed worldwide to maintain the global air fleet over the next 20 years.
Demand from a Boeing or an Airbus for brand new aircraft, it's strong, and it'll be strong for years plural, and that is all driven by more people flying.
The current shortage of AMTs in the U.S. will reach roughly 25,000 workers by 2028. And as more people and goods fly, the global air fleet is expected to grow, adding nearly 46,000 new aircraft between now and 2043.
A United Airlines Boeing 777 bound for Japan had a wheel fall off during takeoff.
2024 brought increased attention to aircraft maintenance, with airlines losing tires or pieces of planes mid-flight, and especially the near catastrophe with Alaska Airlines after Boeing didn't reinstall bolts that hold the door plug in place. The Federal Aviation Administration has also struggled with staffing shortages and funding in recent years. Jobs.
Now, that's an interesting sidebar that I want to talk about here for a second, because they talk about the obvious, a tire fell off. Well, okay, obviously it didn't stick on, but there's been a lot more incidents that have gone along that have been directly related to maintenance, and then some of the things that I would actually start questioning, that was actually my aviation crash investigator spidey sense goes up and says, hey, wait a sec. And for example, I did not hear, and people in the comment section, correct me if you see it, I didn't hear anybody that mentioned that the TCAS system in the airliner at the Washington National accident went off. You should have heard a traffic annunciation in the cockpit, and there should have been a display in front of the pilots. Now, give them the benefit of the doubt. They're doing a visual landing at night, low to the ground. They both were looking out the window or handling the radios. It's possible that they weren't seeing the traffic on their scope, but the TCAS system should have gone off in the overhead speaker. So either it's a human factor and the pilots ignored it, or it didn't go off, which means the speaker was broken or the TCAS system is off. Same thing at that same thing, the same flight, the Black Hawk reading. I was listening to the NTSB briefing, and she had said that the cockpit callback between the Black Hawk pilots left and right, and we're 100 feet off on the altimeter. When they read off the altimeter setting, they were 100 feet off on the reading. 100 feet technically is within limits of a pneumatic altimeter, but they only have 75 feet of clearance between the top of that hard deck 200 feet and the bottom of the glide slope. Now, I'm a pilot in a 737. I understand if you're flying a visual in a big airplane, because you're doing visually, you are tending to land a little bit lower to the bottom end of the, as you get close into the runway, because you start aiming more for the end of the runway instead of the touchdown point. So that tends to put you a little below glide slope. So you've got the airliner, that airliner was within the glide slope, but it was at the bottom edge of it. And you have the helicopter, it was 125 feet above. There should have been a system on the aircraft that went off and warning, and it didn't go off. So, I mean, within time. So that's a maintenance issue. I've got the Learjet in Salt Lake, or in Scottsdale, Arizona. I better remember this one, where it belonged to Motley Crue's the lead singer. Pilot was killed in that landing. The landing gear fell out of the trunnion. And the report that I saw was the fact that the bolt that holds the trunnion into the hole didn't get, in other words, the trunnion didn't go deep enough to the bolt picked up the trunnion, which kept up the landing gear. So the only thing holding that gear in position is the door linkages, and eventually that gave off. Maintenance. You've got engine fire in Houston on takeoff, on an aborted takeoff. Engines catch fire because of maintenance. There's very little pilot can do from the cockpit that causes an engine fire. You had an aircraft come into Denver, and it caught fire at the gate. Again, not a whole lot of pilot could do. So that leads, okay, what was going on with that engine? Now, they were recognizing a vibration issue. Okay, great. what is causing a vibration issue. Should never see one if the engine is being properly maintained. And then the Pittsburgh accident. Okay. I'm in agreement. There was another person on a channel here that as soon as I heard that it went in near vertical, I thought snap roll. That means a Learjet was at a high angle of attack. If it lost an engine, it wouldn't take much yawing position to where if the pilot were to put just a little too much rudder in, let's say if it would surprise them, for example, a Learjet's a slippery jet. If it puts just a little bit too much rudder in, even if it just shakes, or even if it's the wrong rudder, well, what happens is that wing that goes back, being at the high angle of attack, high airspeed, it actually will roll under. And that's called a snap roll. And looking at the trajectory of the jet and how high it was, okay, engine failure, mismanagement of the rudder systems, the airplane went upside down. Got it. Question for me. Okay, engines don't just fail. These engines are life limited. They're required inspections. They shouldn't just fail. Short of a bird strike. But again, there was no indication of a bird strike. Again, at night, heavy weather, even birds don't like to fly in fog. They will, but they don't like it. So there was a lot going on here, even more than they're showing. And then we had also, don't forget, we had 2 mechanics killed at an airline in Atlanta working on an aircraft. Again, that was a maintenance training issue. You have to learn that when I take apart a landing gear wheel, a wheel off a landing gear, there's a certain sequence to do things. Otherwise, it explodes. Before you unbolt the halves, you disconnect the air. I'm not going to say that's what happened, but that's about the only thing I could think of that could happen. So that's what I wanted to point out the video. And now they talk about the shortages of FAA inspectors. We could do a lot with FAA inspectors if they leave the office and go out and into the field. The air traffic control issue is another issue, and I'll leave that for another political channel. But when you put out a hiring freeze, essentially, of a certain classification of person, even if you run out of your most favored people you want to hire, but you refuse to hire that other unclassified person, says, okay, that's a problem. And that's kind of what we talked about. I could see it. I feel so bad for the controller in Washington. I'm sitting there thinking, well, he lived, I understand. But remember, he was at the scope when something happened. And I mean, they are human. FAA people are human.
Like air traffic controllers or maintenance carry a responsibility with them that one mistake could injure or kill hundreds of people.
These go on aircraft that fly millions of people every day. We're there to keep people safe.
Companies like GE Aerospace and aircraft maintenance schools are working to train the next generation of AMTs.
It feels like it's such an honor and a privilege to work on something like this, like a machine that flies.
CNBC visited GE in Lafayette, Indiana, and Aviation High School in Queens, New York, to explore the challenges facing the aviation industry and how it plans to keep up with the demand for mechanics and technicians. The U.S. aviation maintenance industry is a $65 billion business that employs roughly 329,000 people. The work done by an AMT can vary from overhauling an entire plane to specific sections or components. The majority of the workforce is in repair shops and parts manufacturing, and 23% work for airlines. A shortage of AMTs could slow down production or lead to delays, cancellations, even fewer flights. But these workers are also crucial to the global supply chain, military, and emergency services like aerial firefighting. The pandemic brought a sharp drop in air travel. At one point, over 16,000 commercial jets were grounded, and thousands of experienced technicians and machinists were laid off or retired.
People forget that the aerospace industry was in a pretty serious ramp at the time pre-COVID. And then, frankly, of course, overnight, we went from ramping to zero demand over time. And so we lost a lot of talent.
GE dominates the commercial engine space when combined with its joint venture with Safran CFM International. The CFM56 is the best-selling jet engine in history. It powers more than 14,000 commercial and military aircraft, while its new LEAP engines power more than 3,500. The company said it's been able to hire back quickly, but that the aerospace supply chain still hasn't fully recovered. A single jet engine on a commercial aircraft can be made up of 40,000 components.
We need everything to be healthy, everyone be back up to full strength. So often it's our tier 2, tier 3 suppliers that are still in that process and may have some of that risk yet that they haven't seen flow through their workforce.
One more time here that I want to talk about real quick on well, the example here is not great. CNBC went to, essentially, it is a repair station, but it's a repair station that's inside a manufacturer. It's a GE. If you go through and you look at what's going on inside, if that's a manufacturer, and like I said, I'm not 100% sure. There's a lot of repair stations that are inside the manufacturing facility. Not everybody there needs to be a AMP. In fact, very few people are AMPs. For this type of situation, and we'll have something called a repairman, and I'll talk about that in a second. So it's kind of a misnomer is that it was probably easier to attract people into this job because you're working inside, out of the weather, probably regular shifts, maybe a little bit of overtime. It's a different environment than trying to get people to come back to the airline industry when you're 24/7, 365, day, night, or shine, and dealing with all that goes on with that, with that environment. I mean, these aren't the droids you're looking for. And I talk about the shortage before, but so it's an interesting situation, but I do love the fact that they highlighted the high school. That's where we're going to need to get our new aircraft mechanics coming from. I would say we need to start talking to 8th graders is where we need to go, because we do need to get them to the base skills that you need to be successful as a mechanic. Again, being able to read is a very important deal. Being able to do basic numbers. One of the findings I had at this other repair station I worked at, manufacturing I worked at, is that they noticed the technicians that were working for them didn't know how to read rulers or scales or measuring devices because they weren't exposed to it in high school and grade school. So the skill set is definitely different for different places that you're going to work. And again, this is a manufacturer, sure. It doesn't need everybody to be a certificated individual like an airline does. And that's what we're going to go to next, is to an airline.
The number of new mechanic certificates rose 32% in 2023, but the overall number of certified mechanics has stayed near the same level over the past 20 years.
The blue-collar segment of our population has declined, and now aviation seeks and oftentimes needs the best, highest caliber technicians that can then be turned into certificated mechanics or repairmen.
The FAA has specialized certificates on who can perform and approve maintenance before a part or a plane is approved to fly.
The work of non-certificated people has to be supervised.
I got to stop her here because, yes, she's exactly right. Non-certificated personnel who work in aviation have to be supervised. And I know there's an argument right now where, there was an NPRM, a national proposed rulemaking, that went out. And they were talking about under 43.9 Delta. It said, does the supervisor need to be within the area of a person, non-certificated person that's working on an aircraft or component? And the lawyers, rightfully so, the FAA lawyers at legal came back and said, yes, that supervisor needs to be in a position to stop or save the situation, be able to prevent damage or injury or a mistake. And the argument was, and the reason why the regulatory evaluation was done was because the question was, can I supervise somebody by FaceTime or by camera? And our legal department and legal interpretation said, no, you can't. How can you be there looking over the shoulder of a non-certificated technician that's working on an aircraft and claim that they actually are being supervised? Now, the other element of supervision, the most important part of supervision, is that supervisor is passing along information. That supervision is an element of training. As soon as that technician has been performed the task under supervision, they no longer become uncertificated, because that means that they have the skills, the abilities to where we could certificate them. And that's where this person had actually, in the video, had talked about repairmen. Now, I want to say something here real quick before we move on. In the United States, in America, we do not have a minimum knowledge standard certification for a person who identifies himself as an avionics technician. Now, AMT, Aviation Maintenance Technician, and Avionics Technician is in there. I've worked avionics since 1970 something. So when I first started working on aircraft, I worked on avionics before I became a mechanic. Well, wait a second. No, I'm an AMT. I've worked AMP and avionics my whole life. I worked the whole aircraft. It's a separate skill set. It's a different skill and ability, but it should have no less minimum requirements. And this is the problem that I'm seeing out here, to where if somebody comes to me and they claim to be an avionics technician, there's no certificate. So they come from the military. Okay, I got it, but the military is really specialized. Again, I can talk about that in another video. So it's different between the Navy, it's different between the Air Force, it's different between the Army. All the avionics specialties are completely different missions. They also don't have the civil aviation training that an A&P mechanic gets. So an avionics technician should, at least, I think, in my opinion, have passed the general's exam. And that's what the NCAT certification, I'll talk about my NCAT studies later on, but the NCAT certification is 1/3 A&P generals, because anybody who works on an aircraft, certificate or not, should know the generals, what a tool is, what the regulations are, what documentation is, basic mechanics for aircraft or aviation. So that's what kind of gets my bone. We are not counting the shortage of avionics technicians. These are people that read and understand schematics. They have an in-depth knowledge of aircraft systems operations. They understand how the boxes work, and they talk to each other. They can troubleshoot an aircraft electrical system. They know how to set the airplane up. They know how to hook up test equipment. They know how to set up test equipment to simulate aircraft, radio signals to navigate on. They know how to do autopilot systems. It's a specialized skill that a mechanic is not required to have, and yet we do not certificate that in the United States. I think we should, but that's coming up next. But that's not counted in the number of shortages. And we have to admit, these aircraft are really avionics heavy. I can't think of a single system on the aircraft that is not controlled, monitored, or otherwise attached to an aircraft electrical wire or system or bus or communications bus. Now, you can't tell me the FAA doesn't recognize avionics. I'm sorry. The FAA has air carrier avionics inspectors and GA avionics inspectors assigned as a group. They just don't have to be certificated to operate. So, but the rest of the world has an avionics certification, a minimum knowledge standard. So if I hire somebody who's an A&P into my repair station, I at least know, as a new person coming from school, and he'll say that here in a second, you know nothing. You know nothing about the job you're going to start working on that airplane. But you do have at least a minimum knowledge of tools, equipment, safety wire, regulations. Again, there's that regulations again. Really important to understand how to read regulations. Again, A&P school was also designed to get you into the books, to get you into the habit of reading those maintenance manuals, the components repair manuals, to follow written instructions. So that's my pet peeve. Sorry, I'm going to get off my soapbox here and let the video go on.
By certificated people, and certificated people have to approve for return to service.
If a maintenance issue does occur, certified individuals or the company could be fined. The process to get certified for these positions can take years depending on the specific job. GE said that a technician working at its Lafayette, Indiana facility makes an average of $80,000 to $90,000 a year in base pay.
When they walk through the front door, my training is not over. In fact, it goes on for years, in many cases at GE Aerospace and a lot of our peer companies before they're fully formed, fully functional, fully efficient.
Each facility can perform maintenance on what it's been approved for, which the FAA breaks down into different categories like airframe and power plant, which refer to aircraft and engines. There are
I have to go back a little bit here on this video. Sorry, let it run
Fully
here for a
functional,
second.
fully
I'm sorry.
efficient.
Each facility can perform maintenance on what it's been approved for, which the FAA breaks.
Airframe, power plant. These are repair station ratings, but airframe, power plant, airframe means limited airframe. We can work on aircraft. If you're working on a repair station that has an airframe rating, you can work on all the rest of it down there. Everything else that we talk about outside of an airframe rating is a specialty skill. So if I have a power plant shop, like we're showing the example in the skills, I don't need to have a person that has an airframe rating. I could have just power plant rated technicians, and they're people that come from the military that actually have qualifications they earned in the military that they could come back into the civil world. Again, they still have to learn the civil system of doing things. And I don't ever want to get in a situation that people say, well, I don't think military people are qualified. Of course they're qualified. It's just a different system, but it's a system that needs to be adapted to a different set of regulations, a different set of rules. The ATA chapter system is different than the TO system and things like that. So that's the power plant. The next ones are really interesting under propeller and instrument especially. Propeller and instrument are outside the purviews of an airframe and power plant mechanic. If I'm going to repair as a repair station and I'm going to do propellers or instruments, airframe and power plant mechanic is irrelevant. I have to have certificated people under Part 65, which is what A&P is, but they're called repairmen. Same thing for radio and then accessories, the same thing. Is that accessory you could get some airframe rated mechanics. But repairmen now have been the replacement for what I would call that third rating that we need to have. Like in European, the EASA, they have their FAR 66 that has an avionics rating. So that would cover radio and instruments in the United States. So there's a need for a minimum knowledge standard to encourage people in school to learn avionics. And then we would have a certification for everybody that was on the list here. So that's just kind of wanted to say.
Breaks down into different categories like airframe and power plant, which refer to aircraft and engines. They are also known as A&P licenses.
That's your license to learn. You don't know anything about a 737 or an Airbus or a 777 when you get your A&P license.
American Airlines has the world's largest commercial aircraft maintenance facility in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
So when we bring them in, we certainly put them through a lot of training over the course of their first few years, and then that training continues through the rest of their career.
Commercial airlines have to complete a continued airworthiness maintenance program to ensure aircraft are airworthy and safe for passengers throughout an aircraft's life.
Line maintenance manages the active airplanes that we're flying revenue passengers for every day. When you look at base maintenance, we're behind the scenes. We take the heavier work, and no different than changing the oil in your car or rotating the tires, we have similar tasks that we have to do. But instead of just a handful on your car, we have thousands. And those thousands of tasks are accomplished over the course of the life of the aircraft. And so over the course of 20 years, you may see a heavy maintenance event 4, 5, even 6 times.
Now I need to stop here talking about training. American Airlines, Delta Airlines, they all talk about we train, but we start looking at what's happening in the industry, and we're looking at, I've seen it firsthand, is a lot of companies today, they say they train, right? We'll go through and we'll give them an iPad LMS course. We'll call them train. They took a course. I mean, I had one boss that told their employees to, just go ahead and put your phone, your computer on, and let both of the videos play for their online training. So that checks the boxes. And the FAA does have a requirement to ensure that training is invalidated, and I say through OJT. And they are asking for that in the FAA. I've seen that. But they're also not paying for training. And the reason for that is because of the nature of the technicians these days. It doesn't give them any return on investment. When you go through and you pull a technician out for a 40-hour GEMFAM course on an aircraft that you service, and they're off the line, they're being paid, they're working on, they're learning the GEMFAM, General Familiarization, say 737, and then next thing you know, they're taking their training, they're going to the next airline down the street. So a lot of why, one, companies don't want to pay for training because it stops production. And two, why should I pay for training if that person is just going to take it and walk out the door? Well, the problem is everybody has the same attitude, which means nobody's training. I'm sorry. I'm guilty of this too. I do online training, but my online training is the basics. It's something that you learn in school. Same thing. You learn in A&P school. I teach the avionics stuff that's similar to the A&P school. When I get to where this airplane is and that engine is, then I need to be on the job training. I need to have first the background training, show me the system, show me where things are, show me how to read the manuals. Then under supervision, remember, if you've got also a recency of experience requirement to where under Part 65, if I have never done a task before, I can't do it unless I have been supervised to the satisfaction of a supervisor and done it in front of a supervisor. That's the recency of experience requirement for any mechanic working on an aircraft. And I'm sorry, I'm seeing that firsthand, that companies are just not training people anymore. And that demoralizes the technicians too. I left a job as just a mechanic. I was working as a mechanic, then an avionics person for a short time. It was a contractor. They never would send me to school. And I said, hey guys, I'm an avionics instructor. I'm a systems instructor. I'd be more than happy to help you teach. And they told me straight to my face, no, we're not doing that. We're not offering that. I can't help you. So we're not helping me. I'm helping you. I can teach systems. They weren't interested. So, because again, it's a business decision, and that's all I'm going to say about training, but it's not happening. And I know everybody right now, all the CEOs, all the chief inspectors, all the DOMs, everybody out there is screaming at me at the top of their lungs. You're not trained. We train everybody. Everybody's trained. Ask your FAA inspector.
Big airlines like American and aerospace manufacturers like Airbus, Boeing, and GE have had apprentice programs for decades to recruit new talent.
I was just kind of looking for that next challenge, for myself. And it's like, well, automotive stuff's cool, but working on jet engines, that's, pretty awesome too.
Crystal Godinez is part of the first graduating class from GE Aerospace's newest apprentice program in Lafayette, Indiana. At this facility, the company assembles and repairs LEAP 1A and LEAP 1B engines that are used on the Airbus A320neo and Boeing 737 MAX planes.
Working on aircraft engines, like turbine engines, is definitely different than working on automotive. You're working with a lot of parts, a lot of bigger things.
Commercial aviation is a long-cycle business and requires making a lot of decisions years in advance, including hiring.
It is not a spigot where you just turn on the tap and you have a ready now fully functional aerospace employee that's going to work in a factory.
Airlines and manufacturers also partner with technical schools to ensure it will have enough AMTs in the future.
Boeing started coming to us after the pandemic. As the pandemic was kind of winding down, there's an increasing demand for more programs like this.
Aviation High School in Queens, New York has been teaching airplane maintenance to students for 89 years.
We get 4,000 applicants for 500 seats across the 5 boroughs, where they spend multiple periods a day working in their aviation maintenance classroom alongside aviation maintenance teachers who are FAA certified. They've worked in the airlines, they have the experience, and the great majority of those teachers graduated from the school.
Seeing all the engines that they work on, it was really cool. Because I never thought that a school like this existed in New York City.
I'm gonna start working with the airline as I go to college to get my associate's degree in aviation maintenance, and then I'm gonna transfer to a more bigger college to get my engineering degree.
I actually want to end up as a pilot. when I'm older, and I'm using this as a stepping stone because mechanics, they make a decent amount of money, especially when you're fresh out of high school, and I feel like I could use that to pay for my flight training and also already have an in.
Historically, after a program like ours, typically you go to the regional airlines first. Lately, because of the huge technician need, there's been more students going directly into American, Delta, United.
Still, the industry faces challenges with hiring. While working for an airline may be the most visible version of these jobs, they only employ 23% of the AMTs in the U.S.
Aerospace is just a fascinating industry that is only a small portion driven by airlines.
Experts say that a retirement wave is coming to the industry. The average age of a certified mechanic in the U.S. is 54, and 40% are over the age of 60. Only 2.8% are women.
I tried to warn people about this 30 years ago. If it takes me 10 minutes to inspect an inexperienced worker's work, and it takes me 3 minutes to inspect an experienced worker's work, it becomes exponential as you go down the line.
In 2024.
But if I get an inexperienced inspector inspecting an inexperienced mechanic, that's only 6 minutes for both. It's problem solved. Sorry. For all of you who are now typing on in the feeds, that's called sarcasm. I drip with it. I speak fluent sarcasm. So yeah, I'm just being sarcastic, but that is a solution.
Or GE hired 1,900 new engineers and manufacturing workers, but small companies are having a harder time recruiting.
80% of the maintenance facilities we represent are small businesses. They're doing it the same way they've always done it, by word of mouth, etc. A couple are very, very active in local schools.
It's changing. More and more states are looking to do aviation maintenance as a high school, or at least a hybrid high school college program.
But hiring isn't the only issue affecting the aerospace supply chain.
The biggest challenge we're having right now is getting new parts, engines. Training materials for us means like teardown engines or systems that are taken from other aircraft and put onto a board so we can teach students, troubleshoot the faults and so on. And that's been hard to get because there's a shortage of supplies.
While the labor force has faced shortages post-pandemic, it's also dealing with shifting trends. In 2022, a survey of unemployed people in the U.S. showed nearly half wouldn't take a job that didn't offer remote work, a benefit not likely for someone who needs to physically fix an aircraft.
The entire world is going to feel this workforce shortage. You already can't get your houses built. I think that aerospace can actually lead the recovery of that because we do need and want and can train and have trained the elite when it comes to these blue-collar work jobs that are available.
More workers have also been pursuing tech jobs over blue-collar.
I talked to a lot of people in the industry for 30 years that their damn children can't change a tire. For our folks in the repair station environment, the only barrier to entry is you having technical skills, knowing a screwdriver from a wrench, and the desire to learn, period.
Often what we see is people have a very dated view of what it might have looked like in the 1970s. I'd like to believe it's night and day. Just in the physical condition, the work that's being done, the amount of automation and technology. Of course, having competitive compensation helps, but a lot of the investment in training that we've made in our workforce and providing more of a career path is a key part of our retention.
The next generation of mechanics will also need to know about new technologies that are entering the space.
It is getting into the high schools and showing that a career in aerospace as an engineer or frankly on a production floor is not your grandparents' manufacturing. You're dealing with the latest technologies. You're talking about laser-guided machine precision.
The demand on the air transport system will continue to grow as more people and goods will travel by air into the future. But the question remains on whether the already strained industry will be able to fill the jobs it needs to keep up with demand.
Every segment of our white-collar world depends on blue-collar workers. We have to recognize that those ranks will have to be filled by one of two things, either more numbers or technology. The airlines and the big boys are going to be able to automate things. They're going to have to invest in that type of infrastructure to be able to make the remaining technicians more efficient and effective, or they'll have aircraft on the ground.
I'm going to put that up there. That is a great story. I have to give them kudos to CNBC. That was a really good story. I've seen it firsthand. I understand the problems that we're having in aviation right now in hiring and getting the right people and being able to vet people, quite frankly. But also at the same time, we need to, I think we're going to have to go through and have a change of thought or a change of heart. I mean, I don't want to say the come to Jesus moment where we come through and say, hey, are we going to go through and admit that maybe our aircraft technicians should be treated a little bit more respect than, what they would say, the unskilled, unwashed. I mean, called blue collar. I mean, they like pushing that blue collar term out quite a bit. In Europe, they're called engineers because it takes as long as for at least a basic engineer to become a mechanic over there. So I have to argue, I understand, there's 36 months or military time or a school. Of course, the FAA went through and dumbed down. I'm going to use the term dumbed down likely. They just made it, they reduced the standards. In other words, they took away the time requirements. Used to be 1,800 hours to go to school to be an airframe and power plant mechanic. And they did that in the answer to say, hey, we don't have enough mechanics. So what they did is would make it easier to become a mechanic. But the point is now there are people that are graduating without the muscle memory. The 1,800 hours meant that you're doing 1,800 hours of turning screwdrivers, flipping switches, doing safety wire, bolting things together, taking things apart. It's that muscle memory, that 1,800 hours minimum that made you a mechanic. That was the whole point. I mean, same thing with my avionics program. We went out to the aircraft with the test equipment. We set up the equipment. We turned on the aircraft systems. We had 4 727s. God love them. FedEx. Thank you, FedEx. You're the greatest company for giving us those aircraft. I'm just so sad that they're sitting out rotting on the flight line. But to give a mechanic or an avionics technician a real airplane to work on within safety limits, but to have them the muscle memory. And the FAA, I think, made a big mistake by taking away the hour requirements. That was the same thing about before you could be certificated as an aircraft mechanic working on an aircraft. I could get OJT work. I could go through and become an aircraft mechanic. It's 36 months. Now that hasn't changed. But it's 36 months of turning wrenches on aircraft, using the maintenance manuals, the work cards, understanding how to read and follow the instructions, how to follow a schematic, and and all that goes with being a mechanic, an avionics technician the same way. Again, we don't have certification for avionics, which is even more frightening. What are the minimum standards for somebody who wants to be an avionics technician? None, really. Just, sadly for the people that hire them, we just take it on faith that their resume is truthful. And I don't know, there's not a whole lot of truth sometimes going out there. So this is a great video. This is our first live stream. Thank you all for coming on. Please, let's make this channel happen. Go ahead and hit the like and the share and hit the notification bells. I'm going to probably get used to trying to saying that. I don't do a whole lot of live streams. If you guys like this talking, I like it better when I can see people in the chat. We've got nobody in the chat tonight, and you guys can see that. So it's okay. Put something in the chat, but this was short notice. So I'm going to try to do every Saturday, if not every other Saturday. Next week, I'm going to do something on the Swiss cheese model for aircraft accidents. I think it's time we talk about that Swiss cheese and really, what does it really mean? So that's going to be my subject for next week. What is the Swiss cheese model in aircraft accidents? So thank you. Hopefully that when this goes out and I publish it on my website tomorrow, that it starts getting some traction, and I start getting some feedback from you all. So I always have something I want to say about my website when we talk about automation. There may be a day that airplane may arrive at the gate without a pilot in it, that we'll have the automation and the electronics. But I can assure you, it'll never leave the gate without a technician. I know a lot of bean counters go through and they think that we could just get rid of the humans because they go through, they watch the promotional videos that show the machines running automated by themselves with no humans being around. When they talk about, when they talk about where we could save money by getting rid of the people. Well, there's a huge problem with that idea. The problem is that it takes human hands to set up that machine, to turn it on, to go through and feed it, to get it started, to fix it when it's broken. You're going to have technicians and mechanics. They're going to be working on this aircraft, or like Sarah says, they're going to be stuck on the ground. And I'm sorry, people. There are airplanes sitting on the ground right now as we speak that don't have parts, because we don't have parts and we don't have technicians to work on them. That is happening. It's not an if when. It is going to happen. So again, thanks for coming in, and we'll see you on the next one. So keep it safe, everybody.